Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing here is talking a bit about religion in China. Okay, and just to start off with, I'd like to make a few introductory remarks here. And this is useful just to keep in mind how environment can shape religion and a whole society in various ways. And what we'll find in terms of Chinese culture and society as a whole is there's a very strong emphasis on being in harmony with nature, right? And that's one key thing. And we'll see that reflected in Taoism as religion. And the second thing is bringing things into harmony through political control in society, all right? And with that, a greater emphasis on the collective, on the community, on the whole of China, the whole of the family, the whole of Chinese society, as opposed to the individual. You know, the West is very individualistic. That you don't find in China. The priority is on the collective, on the group, okay? And so in terms of geographical factors here playing a role, China is a huge country, you know, often held to be the third largest country, with only about half of its land mass is actually inhabitable. It's very difficult to live on this land mass in a lot of ways, as we'll see here in a couple of pictures. So about 85% of the population is believed has to live on about 35% of the land because of the steep mountains, some areas that are desert-like, other areas that get flooded regularly. So it's a very difficult environment for people to live. And tied in with that, we have a high population in terms of high numbers very early on in China. And so that results in an emphasis on how to control and direct and rule over people in the most effective way for their well-being and for survival. And that's then going to show up in terms of Confucianism as religion. Well, it's really not a religion. It's more of a moral philosophy, social, political kind of thing than it is traditionally a religion. And also it gives rise to the emphasis on how nature is so powerful and we need to be in harmony with the forces of nature. And so Taoism as religion is something that develops in China. And so these kind of reflect the context here. So there's just a couple of pictures you can see, you know, and you've seen tons of these pictures of these, you know, unbelievable mountains that they have in China that are so steep. It's like, what can you do with these? And yet they'll find ways of building temples and building roads and whatnot to get around some of these mountains. It's amazing. And then you can see here just examples of modern cities with high population, extremely dense in certain areas, where you've got high rises galore. And then, of course, in the lower flatlands is where you'll grow a lot of the crops, but they easily can get flooded. Okay, so it's just a bit of an example here to see, again, the nature of the land there. So when we look at, the reason why I call this religion in China is because it's a little bit more complex. We have a number of things happening in China. We have its own kind of indigenous, popular or folk religion that develops. And a lot of that revolves around honoring the dead ancestors. Okay, now that's something that's not specifically Taoist or Buddhist or what have you, okay, but it's just a part of the tradition of the people with a religious element. And we'll find this in most indigenous societies, they have these sorts of ideas and practices and beliefs. So number one is the honoring of dead ancestors. Secondly, a belief in various deities, and we'll look at some of these, that form a type of spiritual hierarchy. All right, a spiritual hierarchy that very much mirrors human government and human hierarchy. Okay, then we also have traditional beliefs about the afterlife. Okay, that aren't necessarily tied in with just Taoism or Buddhism. And we'll kind of go into all of this stuff here. And we also have an emphasis just naturally in China of being in harmony with the forces of nature. And that is, again, something you find in all indigenous societies. When people had to live directly off of the land, it was a key emphasis and focus. So you've got popular religion on the one hand. Then you get the development of Confucianism, all right, which we'll see here, and that has strong influence on social, cultural factors here in China, and they'll kind of blend. It'll blend a bit into the folk religion aspect. Then we have the rise of Taoism in China. These are Confucianism and Taoism are indigenous. They are Chinese traditions. And in Taoism, often there's a distinction made between philosophical Taoism the teachings of Lao Tzu and Chuang-Tzu, and then there are various religious Taoist sects that develop. Okay, generally it's held. There's been about 86 of these that emerged over time. Then we have Buddhism coming into China around 100 CE, and Buddhism has a strong influence in China and Chinese culture and society. And so it introduces reincarnation, as I say here, the idea that there are many heavens and hells, especially lots of hells, okay, is the idea that gets developed there. And the Chinese people, because again, they always want to bring things into harmony and kind of try to integrate things. You'll find that a lot of these traditions kind of tended to blend together. And so in various areas, especially, for example, here locally in Vancouver, the Chinese Buddhist temple has elements of Confucianism, Taoism, folk religion. All these things are kind of blended together in the temple. Okay, which is interesting. So you'll find this in Chinese culture, and that's why I call it religion in China, because most people will be involved in all of these traditions, often in various degrees. And so there isn't that sort of divisive idea that I'm hardcore Taoist or hardcore Buddhist and there have to be in conflict, even though that does happen in the history of China. Okay, they also had their holy wars in a sense of trying to get government support and being in power politically. You do find that, and there are times when the Taoists would get wiped out and the Buddhists would be in power, and at times the Buddhists would get wiped out and the Taoists be in power. You have those sorts of things going on, and it's human nature. Okay, it happens all over the place. And however, even having said that, though, generally people will be embracing elements of all of these in various ways. Okay, again with a lot of variation, but just to be aware, this is something that's again distinct in China, and that's why I'm titling this Religion in China, to address all of these little elements. Okay, all right. So in terms of history, we have here legendary material going way back. Let me just move hopefully, I don't know if that moves very well, my screen face thing. There's a tradition of these legendary 5 emperors that are responsible for the founding of Chinese civilization. And the first of these is known as the Yellow Emperor, and he's the only one that I'm going to talk about, mention, is regarded as being the father of the Chinese people, the one who's responsible for having given birth, in a sense, to the Chinese people themselves. And the other 4 are responsible for various elements in Chinese civilization. Okay, in terms of writing and working with metals and various things associated with civilization. And they all are held to have their origins with these 5 legendary emperors. Now, the last of these, the 5th emperor, is the one that is held to have been responsible for the first dynasty, the Shah dynasty of around 2000 BC or so. But generally it's held that this is more legend than history. That's what most academics hold. And where we really want to begin the story in terms of history is with the Shang dynasty, which is held to be the first historical one, because we have writing and we have a lot of archaeological evidence to work with here. And that's around 1700 BC. And what's interesting here with the Shang dynasty is we have over what's called 100,000 oracle bones that were found in the royal palace. And what we see here is the writing that develops at this time predominantly revolved around the practice of divination. Writing was used to try to get answers from the universe, to get guidance, to get input as to, helping and making decisions. What's the right course of action to take? What might happen in the future on this point or that point? Okay. And so what they did back then is they would have a question, and they would take either the shell of a turtle or tortoise shell, or the shoulder blade bone of an animal. Okay, but again, there wasn't many cattle or that there in China. That wasn't really a major food source because of, again, the geography wasn't suited for that. But they would take either a shell or a bone, and they would pose a question. Right? They'd want to know something. I always like to think of as, would it be auspicious if the king went on a journey into the neighboring province next week, for example? That would be the question they put forth. Then they take this shell or the bone, heat it over fire, and then dunk it in cold water. And the contrast between hot and cold will then force cracks to appear. And it's held that the answer to the question would be in the shape of the cracks, that there would be, images conveyed in some way. And so what they then did is they would write down on that same shell, tortoise shell, for example, they would write down the question that was asked, what the answer they thought they saw in the cracks in the shell, okay, what they thought the answer was, and then additional commentary to see what actually happens. They kind of kept a record to see how accurate things were and if they read it right and whatnot. So, for example, the question was, would it be auspicious? Would it be okay if the king went on this journey next week to the neighboring province? And maybe the answer would be no, danger. Some kind of image to indicate that there'd be danger. And so they don't. And then they see what happens. Well, then they notice, aha, well, that week when the king was thinking of going on this trip, there was this massive storm that hit in the valley, and there was a flood of water that happened then in the valley, and he would have been in danger if he went on this trip. So indeed, we got good guidance on this one, for example, right? So this is what these oracle bones are. And as I mentioned, it's over 100,000 of these were found in the Shang dynasty, the oldest dynasty in China going way back, okay, to 1700 BC. And based on this practice of divination, trying to get guidance from the universe, putting forth a question and creating some kind of tool or technique like this, which they did, to get the answers, to allow the energies of the future that are about to happen, or what's ever there in nature, these energies, to direct the cracks in a certain way that would give them the answer to their question. Out of that, doing that for a long time, hundreds of years, it develops into the book of changes called the I Ching. Okay, and you may have seen it, and I think I have it on a slide. I know I have it on a slide coming up. It becomes a very popular book of divination in China, and it has its roots going way back to the very beginning. And we see here in China, as we see in virtually all ancient societies, is a keen interest and focus on divination, of trying to somehow tune in to those higher energies and forces, if they be God, spirits, or natural forces of energy in the universe, for guidance and insight, all right, in life, in terms of, should I do this or should I do that? Is this better? Is that worse? Whatever, getting guidance, okay, is a big thing. So anyway, that's one thing that shows up here. And so it's always been a part of Chinese culture, so that even today, if you go to a Buddhist temple, Chinese temple of any kind, there's going to be something there for you for a divination tool or practice where you could get answers to your question. Okay, it's just a part of the Chinese tradition. And again, it's something you find all over the world in more indigenous ancient societies. Okay, all right. I'm just going to highlight a little bit of this history, and then I'm going to go back into some more ideas. The Shang dynasty got overthrown by the Zhou dynasty, okay, around 1300 BC, claiming to have the mandate of heaven. And I'm going to talk about that coming up here, okay. Eventually, the Zhou dynasty starts to fall apart, and we enter into what's called the Warring States period, where it is total chaos in China. And you have these warlords, one after another, fighting each other to try to have, to win and have conquest over all of China, right? So that goes on for, a couple hundred years of just total chaos. So things totally decline into chaos. And this is a period, all right, as things are in declining just before the Warring States period. This is the context for the rise of Confucius on the one hand, and Lao Tzu and Chuang-Tzu on the other hand. Okay, so Confucianism and Taoism, these two traditions, they developed in the context of things being in total decay at the government level, at the political level in China at this time. And both Taoism and Confucianism are attempts to resolve the issue of collapse of political rule, corruption in political rule, and analyze what the problem is and what the solution could be. Okay, so for Confucius, he's going to hold that the problem was a lack of moral virtue, that the rulers no longer did the will of heaven, that they lost their morality, and that's what they need to be educated on. And if the rulers got educated in moral virtues and moral principles, then they would establish a just society and one that is in order for the well-being of all people. Okay, that was the Confucius response to the situation. Okay. And then Taoism, they're going to say, no. What the problem is that people are no longer in harmony with nature. They're no longer in harmony with nature. They've become these urbanites, and with it, they've been corrupted, but with a quest for greed, a quest for power, right? And that is what has led to the problem. So the solution is not stronger government or a more moral government, but actually renouncing, in a sense, all government and people coming back into harmony with nature and living a very simple life in the forest, one with the Tao, all right? And that is the way to come into peace and harmony, all right? So this is where they're going to go, okay? That's where, in terms of context for Confucianism and Taoism, okay? And I'll talk more about all that here in a bit. Well then, so we have the Warring States period, and it finally comes to an end where the Jin dynasty arises and brings peace, conquers all these different warlords in a sense, and once again we have a unified China. And that's where we get the word China from, is from the Jin dynasty, okay, at 221 BC. And however, they were only in power for not that long, for a few years. Then they were overtaken by the Han dynasty, which was then in power for about 400 years, as you can see there, 200 BC onward to 220 CE, okay? And that's all I'm going to do for history, but it's just that this is an important context here for understanding some of the ideas that I'm going to talk about. All right? Okay. So hopefully that's all, again, just wanting to contextualize Confucianism and Taoism and whatnot. So now to go into some of the ideas. And first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about popular religion or folk religion in China. Okay, and as I mentioned, these entail very, very ancient ideas that are indigenous to the Chinese people. Okay, I'm just gonna, I don't know, should I pause here? How come it's not showing up? Why is nothing showing up? Okay, here's the one I have. Sip of my coffee here. So in terms of popular religion, there's a number of things involved here, and this is just some of the things I'm going to highlight here. As I had already intimated, what's going to develop early on in China is a vision of the spirit world as being basically a type of spiritual bureaucracy. All right, as I mentioned, it will mirror human society, where in Chinese society there would be the emperor who is ruling over China, and under the emperor would be all the aristocrats, government officials who are his assistants in helping him run the Chinese empire. Right? And then under them would be then the local mayor or police chief in the village, overseeing the village. And then under him would be then the peasants, okay, who are working the land. And it's very much sort of like a feudal system. So likewise, in terms of the world of the gods, they form a similar type of hierarchy, where up on top you have the Jade Emperor. Now, the Jade Emperor was originally called Shangti at the time of the Shang dynasty, which meant the Lord on high. And the Lord on high is responsible for overseeing the whole of the universe. Okay, he's the king of the universe, overseeing all of creation, the universe, what have you. Then as time went on, he eventually became known as Tian, meaning heaven, and is referred to as heaven, and then eventually as the Jade Emperor. Okay, so there's a different terminology was used across time, because again, we're dealing with thousands of years of history here. And even to today, he's known as the Jade Emperor. That is the name that has been in place now for quite some time, hundreds of years, if not 1,000 years or more. All right, so he's ruling the universe, the Jade Emperor. Okay, and then under him will be various deities functioning like government officials, helping him run the universe, that are responsible for different aspects of nature. Okay, different aspects of life. And this is again what you find typical in ancient societies, you know, like a sun god, a moon goddess, a rain god, the mountain god here, you know, various deities over different areas and spheres of life, that they are assistants to the Jade Emperor who oversees it all. But then what's key is that every area or region will have their local earth god, Gong. And Gong is responsible for a particular region, like it could be a city or a village, a certain designated area. And he functions like the local police chief mayor. And so the people will go to the local earth god to always pay respects, inform the local earth god, who's been born, who's died, who's getting married, what's all going on in the community. And regular offerings are always made. There's always kind of some food offerings, incense that's burned, as a prayer. And they're responsible, the local earth god is responsible for protecting that community, protecting it from, robbers, criminals, evil spirits, bad luck, all right, to make sure that things go well for the people in the community. It's sort of like a protector, guardian spirit of some kind. Right? That's the local earth god, Gong. And so that even like here in the Chinese Buddhist temple, locally, there is the local earth god. And there's a little statue image, like normally I take the class there. And you could see the local earth god that people pay their respects to, who's responsible for the region, right? And the key thing about the local earth god is they're expected to do a good job. And if they don't, you can file a complaint and have them replaced with somebody who might do a better job. Okay? The gods can be replaced. They are expected to perform and do their jobs of protection, blessing, what have you, for the community, okay, to make sure. And again, Chinese culture, and you find this in ancient societies. Religion was always meant to empower you in this life, that you would be prosperous, that you'd be successful, okay, that you would have lots of food and everything would go well for you, number one. Number two, that you'd be protected from danger, protected from harm, protected from evil spirits, from bad things happening, okay? They're meant to protect you as well, all right? So they provide for you and have things successful for you, and they protect you from harm, all right? And then thirdly, they can empower you. When you're sick, they will help you. If you're weak, you can get strength. If you need guidance as to know what to do, they bring guidance. Very practical. Religion historically has been very practical in empowering and helping people in this life, right? Okay. Anyways, and then you have the local earth god. Then you have the stove god. And the stove god was a deity in the home that is responsible for the people in the house. Okay, sort of like you have the local deity that's a guardian over the house. Again, you can find this idea in Indigenous ancient societies, that there's a guardian over your home, over your family, all right? You'll see this showing up in various places. So anyway, and I'll have a picture. Oh, I'm going on into detail because I actually have pictures. Yeah, whoops, where am I here? Yeah, okay, here. Yeah, so here's a picture of the Jade Emperor, okay, to the right, seated on his throne. Like, that's a massive statue. It's like a temple in and of itself, as you can see there, the people going in. And then here in the middle is an image of, and again, the images vary, all right? They're not universal, kind of images. That is the local earth god, okay, a particular image of a local earth god. And it's typical, you'll have food offerings always there, and incense burning is usually the norm, okay? So you can see here the Jade Emperor to the right, local earth god in the middle, and over to the left is a picture of the stove god. Sometimes also called the kitchen god. And it's always associated with in the kitchen where you have your stove, where there's a fire that's burning. And the stove god is responsible for overseeing the family, and he keeps a record of your deeds. He knows who's been naughty or nice. Okay, and so a part of the Chinese New Year traditionally has been is that the stove god is going to hand in a report to the Jade Emperor on the family in terms of, who's been good, who's been bad, handing in a report on the family. And so the tradition would be that there'd be like a picture of the stove god that would be hanging above the stove, and you would smear some honey on his lips, and then you burn the picture. And as the picture burns, that is how the stove god is leaving the physical world, turning into smoke, all right, in the fire, and transforming into the spiritual world. And he's making his journey up to the Jade Emperor. to hand in his report. And then you put up a new picture for the new year. So you smear honey on his lips, so only says sweet things about the family. Okay, so he only says sweet things about the family. Okay. So that's sort of a part of the Chinese New Year tradition, is you always start the new year with a clean slate, a clean record. Hopefully last year's record was pretty good. Clean the house, right? Get some new clothes. You know, again, it's so interesting. We have New Year traditions all over the world. Start a fresh start, you know, new clothing, clean the house, declutter, say goodbye to the old, bring in the new. It's like sometimes we need a rebirthing, a renewal, start the year with a new start, all right? It's quite a universal thing. So anyway, so these are some aspects here of popular religion and the deities involved. Okay, oops. And I talked earlier about divination and the I Ching. And so there you can see is a copy of the book. I Ching means the book of changes. And again, it's ancient. It goes back thousands of years, and it will involve these. Excuse me. We'll talk a bit about it later, but the principles of yin and yang. Okay, yin and yang. Yang. Oh, okay, no, I don't want to jump ahead here. But a straight line, excuse me, oh boy, my voice is going. Yang is a solid line, and yin is a broken line. And so you'll have a trigram of 3 of these lines, and you can have various combinations if they're all yin or all yang. As you can see, they're opposite there, okay, all blocked, straight, solid lines or broken lines, or they're a mix of broken and solid, okay, and you've got various combinations there. And then when you double that up and have 2 of them combined, that will lead to altogether 64 different combinations. And so then whatever your question would be, you would have a question, you would toss these coins of various kinds, if they're yin or yang, and various combinations, whatever element is used, something that could be used, it could be sticks, 68 sticks in a container, or coins that you use, you then would get the answer to your question. There'd be 68 different possible answers, okay? And depending on how, you know, you do your tossing, you'll get the answer to your question, okay? That's sort of the idea here. But that's how it evolved, going way back, the I Ching and divination. And here to the right is Feng Shui. Now, Feng Shui, also known as geomancy, okay, geomancy. And here it's working with the energies in the life in nature, and that where you build your building, how you build the building, how you set up the rooms, how you set up the entrance. Is the building on a mountain facing south? Is it near a river, near a lake? You know, all kinds of things. Is like there's different energy patterns in nature. Right? And so you want to set up both where you build and how you build, okay, how you set up the environment. It will determine the kind of energy dynamics going on in that place. And so just to give you a bit of an example, say if you had your house built at the end of a dead end street or a cul-de-sac, is held that the chi energy coming down that street, boom, and that house is built right at the end, like that. It's like that energy will just hit the house and it will blow out all the energy of that house. So people living there will be tired, easily get sick. The money will just keep going. It's like they won't be able to hold on to their money, all right? And so they'll be struggling financially. So you would never want your house to be at the end of a street. You'd always want the entrance into your house to be at an angle and kind of curvy going in, because then that will help protect and contain a good energy in that house, for example. Okay, so there's, just to give you a bit of an idea, there's a lot involved with Feng Shui or geomancy, but it's all about working with the energetic dynamics in nature and how things are positioned in relationship to, you know, the sun, the mountain, the water, you know, whatever, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so the Chinese were, again, this just shows, very tuned in to the forces of nature in terms of how you set it up to be in harmony with those forces so that things will go well for you. You'll be successful and prosperous, to get guidance through the I Ching, to tune into those forces, to be guided in the right way. It's all about being in harmony. okay, with those energies and forces. So you can have be prosperous and successful in life, have many children, and live a long time. All right, have a long life. And that's again to where Taoism will really come in, and Chinese medicine all comes in terms of how to enhance the energy in the body so you could have a long life, okay, and a healthy life. So these are all sorts of things that show up here in, now can I go down to the next one? How does this work? Yeah, in geomancy and divination, okay, a part of popular religion in China, okay, popular religion in China. Now here, I had on that slide way back where I talked about or mentioned the beliefs about the afterlife, okay, and I'm just gonna have it sip here, I'm not gonna pause. Yeah, now here you'll see a Chinese temple, okay, up there, and people burning incense as they go to the temple, and they will go to the temple to pay respects to their dead ancestors. And on the lower left here is there'll be tablets like this. There'll be little plaques, all right, for a position for their future ancestor that's going to die. They've got reserved a spot, or they already have passed and their picture will be there. And so they will go to the temple to honor their dead ancestor. But they also have the cemeteries where your relatives are buried, okay, in a cemetery, and you would pay respect to your dead ancestors at their cemetery. Now, the interesting thing, what happens here in ancient China is a belief, and you'll find this again in most ancient cultures and societies, is a much more complicated belief about the nature of the soul and the afterlife. They believe that there are different parts of the soul go to different places when you die. All right. It's only, as history moves along, and people philosophize and theorize about the afterlife and the nature of the soul, that we now have actually a rather simplistic view of the soul, that you just have this one thing called a soul that will leave the body and go somewhere when I die, like heaven or hell or what have you, right? And it's a very streamlined, simplistic view. In ancient societies, it's more complex. It's how there are many parts of the soul, and they have different functions, and they can go to different places. So anyways, here in China, in ancient China, the belief was that you'll have different parts of the soul that go to different places. So one part of the soul will go to reside at the tablet in the temple. Okay, this is the higher part of the soul that has the possibility of becoming a type of guardian spirit or God that can guide you, help you out when you need it, is more helpful as a spirit, okay, and can even potentially become a deity, okay, a God. Okay, so that's a higher part of the soul that will be living in the temple in the tablet. And you are expected to regularly go there, paying your respects through the burning of incense, a food offering there, okay, to remember your dead ancestors at the temple. Then there's a second part of the soul, that's a lower part of the soul, that will be buried in the cemetery. And this is where you would go and pay respects there. And every spring equinox, there's a special festival, the Qingming festival, where everybody would go to the cemetery to clean it up, pull out weeds and dust it and clean it all up, put in some fresh flowers, fresh food offerings, burning of incense, and you kind of have a family reunion, okay, a family reunion of the living with the dead at the cemetery once a year, okay, as part of the spring festival. And this part of the soul has the potential to become a hungry ghost, okay, what they call a hungry ghost. If your dead ancestor is neglected, if they did not have a proper burial, if they're not remembered and regularly honored in this kind of a way, they will become an unhappy spirit, a restless spirit, a hungry ghost. And this hungry ghost can become like, what most people think of as an evil spirit that will haunt you, can haunt a place, cause problems, have everything go bad for you, bad luck, just cause problems. Okay, so that's that part of the soul. So that's why it's so important to honor your dead ancestors. okay, through these rituals to make sure that they're content, they're happy, and not become a hungry ghost. Then it was held that there's another part of the soul that actually journeys in the other world, that goes to, at first it was called the Yellow Springs, kind of a shadowy underworld, real pretty ambiguous in ancient China, very similar to the concept of Hades amongst the Greeks, Sheol amongst the Hebrews, the house of clay in India. You'll find throughout the world this idea that there's just sort of a shadowy underworld that's nothing that great. It's not like wonderful heaven or something. Okay? Well, then when Buddhism comes to China, Buddhism introduces the idea that, wow, there's all kinds of wonderful possible heavens. Like if you remember about Buddhism and the bodhisattvas and different heavens. And then also, though, Buddhism really develops the idea that there are many hells. 10 hells, sometimes 12, the numbers vary, but there's a lot of hells that you have to journey through to deal with all your bad karma. And so then it's held after you've dealt with all your bad karma, you can then reincarnate or maybe get to go to a heaven, but you also eventually reincarnate. So Buddhism brings into, and how it develops in China, is the idea that there are many heavens and hells and reincarnation. And so the afterlife then becomes more complicated. And what you'll find is that, I don't know what to say here because I'm not Chinese or, anything like that. But you have a complex view of the afterlife going on here. And so people will be involved in all kinds of traditions and practices and beliefs that, yeah, there's reincarnation. Yeah, my dead ancestor is here at the temple. Yeah, my dead ancestor is over there in the cemetery. But yeah, oh yeah, no, they're going to spend some time in heaven first before they reincarnate. Or boy, they need help to get through these hells really quickly because of their bad karma. You'll have a variety of these ideas going on here, and it will depend upon that particular person as to what they do, what they all want to think about all these ideas. But just so you know, this is the kind of stuff that's there in terms of folk or popular religion in China. Okay, hopefully this makes all some sense. Okay, whoops. And this last bit here is about the mandate of heaven. I'm going to hopefully move this and hopefully that so you can see this. Now this goes back to, if you remember way back, I don't know if I should try to go back there. You know what, I will. Okay, let me just resume. Pause. All right. Yeah, if you remember this earlier slide here, or I have these different things listed in terms of what we're covering here. Okay. Yeah, and you can kind of read that if you want, is the whole idea of the mandate of heaven. And this is not the slide that I wanted. I want to go even back further here. Yeah. The Zhou dynasty, they overthrew the Shang dynasty, right? Claiming to have the mandate of heaven to do so. And so here, what the idea entails, and let me just go down to, here, is with the Shang rulers, they claimed that they had the right to overthrow, I should say, the Zhou, the Zhou dynasty, that they had the right to overthrow the Shang dynasty because they claimed the Shang rulers had become corrupt over time. And therefore they lost the backing of, what later would become the Jade Emperor, but they here at this point, they started to call heaven, okay? And that the supreme being ruling over the universe, Shangti, the Lord on high, that was the name that the Shang rulers gave him, that he no longer supported the rules of the Shang people because he had become corrupt. And so instead now, he chose the Zhou tribe of people, okay, that's going to establish the Zhou dynasty, that they were to rule, okay, and so they get replaced. And so that then they would establish peace and well-being for the people because heaven, so to speak, the supreme being, is concerned that whoever is ruling over the people would be a just ruler and would ensure and rule for the well-beingness of the people and not be corrupt and not abuse and exploit the people, okay, but would be a just ruler. And that is his calling. It is a divine backing of the political system. that God, so to speak, to use that word, is the one that's actually behind the political rulers and will replace political rulers, will replace the emperor if the emperor and, the aristocrats are no longer ruling the people in a just manner. Okay, so if they lose their virtue, as I say here, they will be replaced. And so this is a bit of the idea that gets established here by the Zhou rulers, that a new dynasty will be brought in that will establish peace, okay, and will protect the people and do good for the people. But then the idea is that over time it will become corrupt, as we see always in human history, too much taxation, too much abuse, and they will then be removed from their position of power and new rulers will be put into place. And so that is the idea of the mandate of heaven. That heaven will remove its protective power and its favor from kings who lack virtue. Once they start to rule out of greed and rule unjustly and not for the welfare of the people, they will be replaced by new rulers. This becomes a very important idea in Chinese history and culture, right? The Zhou dynasty establishes this concept, and it continued on right up until the 20th century. So for thousands of years, this was very much held to and believed. And this is going to be the basis for what Confucius is going to be all about. As a result of this concept of the mandate of heaven, Chinese philosophers and intellectuals started to question and wonder, okay, what does it mean to be a virtuous ruler? To have a moral ruling government, okay? And what does that entail? What does that look like? And this is basically what Confucius tries to do. He tries to spell out exactly what that looks like, what that would entail, okay? And that then came to dominate Chinese politics for thousands of years, a couple thousand years, right? Until Mao over, oh, I think I have it. Do I have a slide on that? Oh yeah, here. Yes, I did. When I talk about Confucius, boy, my voice goes. Whoops, I don't want that. I just told you, oh good, I can remove my head altogether. Yeah, as I say here, under Mao Zedong in 1949. So we had the communist revolution taking place there after World War II for a few years, and then Mao Zedong establishes the Communist Party in China. And so this idea of a moral, virtuous political order is something that gets put in place by Confucianism. The Confucius ideas, Confucius never saw it in his lifetime, but it became a reality after his lifetime. And it's tied in with this idea of the mandate of heaven that really came in place. All right. So I'm going to just quickly still go through Confucianism. I was going to do that separately, but I'm not, because I'm not going to talk too much about it. Okay, so that's about popular religion. All right. I don't know if you need to see me here, but so now just a little bit about Confucianism. As I mentioned, it's really not a religion as such, it's more a moral, social, political philosophy. And so Confucius, or Confucio, as you can see here, Confucius, his dates were 551 to 479 BCE. And remember, as I mentioned, this was a time where we're seeing an increasing deterioration of the political situation in China, increasing corruption. Okay, and so Confucius was a government official who became very disillusioned with what he was seeing, and he sought reform, wanted to restore moral virtue among the ruling class. Right? He held that that is what would be central to having social order, a harmony in society that is guided by moral virtues. So, in a nutshell, these are the key principles that he advocated. That number one, people need to commit to what he called humane goodness. And that's basically being committed to doing the good thing just simply for the principle of it, not for self-benefit, not in a utilitarian way like, oh, I'll do something good for you if you do something good back for me. No, 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 no. You just commit to doing what's good and what's right out of principle, period. Even if there's no benefit to you, you're just committed to doing what's right and good. Okay, so it's like being good to each other, being kind to each other, just a commitment to goodness. Right? And then that's tied in with reciprocity, what we often call the golden rule. We see this in the Jewish Christian teaching, do unto others as you'd have them do unto yourself, right? Here, the way Confucius worded it, he says, don't do to other people what you wouldn't want to have done to yourself. So if you don't want somebody to steal your stuff, loot, destroy, attack, harm you, then do that to others. Okay, so basically, live in a way and do to other people the way you want to be treated. Again, that's the golden rule, right? Okay. So again, he's saying that if the ruling class would be committed to these and then lived by them, they then would be a model for the rest of society. And to bring that into the education system and the political system, it will filter down that the whole of society, all people would live according to these moral principles. It'd be heaven on earth. And it's really not rocket science, right? And we need to hear this today. Anyway, to continue on, princely gentlemen, junsen, that you should seek to be, and again, I want to stick to the original term, princely gentleman, to be someone of noble character, true nobility. Okay, that sort of princely gentleman is somebody who's noble, of the noble class, okay, of the upper class. And what he held is that nobility, being truly of the upper class, is not defined or determined by your social standing due to birth, because I happen to be born as a prince or born into the ruling class, that automatically makes me noble. It's like, no, it's a matter of character. All right, you need to embody the character of being a noble person. That is what truly makes you a prince or a princess. Okay, is being somebody of noble character. Right? And it doesn't matter if you're born as a peasant or not, right? So to be committed to noble character, as opposed to thinking you're automatically noble due to birth, right? Okay, rectification of names. What that entailed is that you need to, another phrase I like using is you need to live up to your name. So what's meant by name is your calling in life, the role that you play in life. So if you are a mother, live up to the name. Be the best mother that you could be. If you are a student, okay, live up to the name. Be the best student that you could be. Whatever job you have, if you're a teacher, if you're a doctor, if you're this or that, whatever role you have in life, whatever your name, your title is in life in terms of what's expected of you to do, okay, in terms of profession and whatnot, as I said, like a parent or what have you, be the best that you can be. Make that your goal. Live up to your name. Okay, excellent idea. And then the 5 relationships. And this is where you very much get the Chinese idea of hierarchy, of respect. Okay, that you always respect whoever is above you. So the ruler, there needs to be respect by those who are being ruled. You need to have a respect for the ruler. You need to have a respect for the president, the prime minister, those who are ruling above you. The wife is to have respect for her husband, the child to the parent, the younger sibling or younger brother to the older one, right? And a friend to a friend. These are sort of the 5 relationships of respect. So it's basically giving respect to who is above you. So it's very much hierarchical. Right? But yet, and you think, well, this could be abusive. Yes, it can be. But if you hold to the other principles of living up to your name, being the best father, being the best ruler, being the best parent, okay, the golden rule, being committed to goodness, that will counter, okay, the potential abuse of that. Okay, so these are, again, some of the key principles that Confucius held. And his dream was that these ideas, if these principles would be taught to the ruling class, to the aristocrats, to those who were in power, and if this was brought into the education system for those who work in government, this then would indeed create social harmony, social order, peace, and justice. Right? And that was his dream, that this would become a part of the education system. He never saw this happen in his life. Okay, he was very disappointed that You know, his dream never manifested in his life, but it eventually did much later. Okay, you've got his dates there. He died 479 BC, right? Well, about 300 years later, indeed, at the time of the Han Dynasty, okay, the Han Dynasty, in 124 BC, they opened the first university that would train bureaucratic officials, all right, the upper class people, the aristocrats, along Confucian lines, right, for government service. And that basically has been in place for all the way up to the overthrow of the Communist Party in 1949. Okay, so this is how important Confucius was. And so what you do find is you have a picture here. There's a Confucian temple. And remember how earlier I mentioned that there's a possibility that the higher soul can become a god. Well, this is what happens here, is how that Confucius was a person of such nobility, gifting, so contributed to society and to humanity, such a noble person, right, a great person, that he was in a sense exalted as a type of deity. And so you can pay respects to him as a type of dead ancestor slash god in a Confucian temple, right? They're set up in honor of him. Okay, and so there you go. That's what those pictures are. All right, so that's all I'm going to do for today on this aspect, and the other next one will be on Taoism. Okay, all right. Ciao for now.